All right, good morning, not good morning. Good evening, everyone. It's good to have you all here and those joining us online, and those that I'm sure will join us in a few minutes as we trickle in. Today, we are finishing the book of Judges, and this is our last Bible study for 2022. We won't have Bible study again until January 8th, which will be like the first not New Year's Day, Sunday of January. And so we'll take on the book of Revelation starting then. But it's hard to imagine that this year we finished our Minor Prophets study. We did the 16 Fundamental Truths. We did the Ask the Pastor series. And now we've spent 10 or 12 weeks in the book of Judges. So let's pray first. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the opportunity we have to gather together, to hear your voice, to study your word and to discern what you would speak to us. God, as we deal with some difficult topics today, God, we pray that our hearts would be open to hear like what your spirit would speak to us. God, that as we read some of the most difficult passages in all of Scripture, that our hearts would be guarded against attack and against anything that would seek to impact our confidence and trust in you as a good and loving God. So we commit our time to you and we pray this all in your holy precious name. Amen. So as our goal every week, we want to have Berean hearts to search the scriptures and understand truth like the Bereans did for Paul in Acts 17. And then also we want to ask a couple questions, like what does this text say about God's ways, his heart, and his character? And how is this text useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work, like Paul says in 2 Timothy. And honestly, what does this passage say about God's ways, heart, and character is going to be a difficult question for us to ask today. The last 3 chapters of Judges, in my opinion, in my judgment, are the hardest passages in all of Scripture. Largely because it is hard to see where God exists in this. As we read through this, we have to remember this is an account of God's people. And we will see throughout that it is not God driving the actions that take place in these chapters. It is God observing what his people are doing in the grand scheme of his glorious plan for humanity. Just a quick remember what we said about these final chapters, the 2 that we talked about last week, where they carved an idol and the people of Dan went, captured the idol and occupied their own city. That these chapters are kind of like a footnote on the rest of the text. There are no judges mentioned in these chapters. We see a common refrain throughout these are that the people did what was right in their own eyes and there was no king in the land at that time. These sections focus less on God and Israel's collective salvation plan and their need for a deliverer like we have seen in other sections. Instead, these last 5 chapters focus on the apostasy of Israel, right? They're turning from God in a time where there is not a unified leadership. And if we remember what we've presented is that this text is probably compiled into the form we have today around the time of Jeroboam and Rehoboam when the kingdoms split. The message and the point of the text of Judges is we need a unified, godly king, and we need to follow God's plan and God's king, and we can't just everybody do their own thing, that whatever it feels good in the moment, right? And so what we see at the end is the culmination of what happens when people just do whatever they feel like in the moment. We've also presented that these chapters become complicated with the timeline, and that when we read the book of Judges, we have to remember that they may not be presented chronologically, so that the first chapter happens first and the last chapter happens last. These are stories about people in this time, and instead, perhaps, because we've seen people that are claimed to be the grandchildren of Moses and Aaron, existing in this place, and this is also, if it's chronological, it's 400 years after Moses and Aaron died. So it is possible that these chapters are placed here theologically to show the cumulative effect of people doing what is right in their own eyes in the land of Israel. So some transparency though, like this section gets really weird, and I just want some trigger warnings. We're going to talk about rape, murder, abduction, the devaluing of women, abuse.
6 o'clock news.
Yeah, you know, the 6 o'clock news, but we're going to get it much more graphically actually than much of the 6 o'clock news. This section, the best way I can describe it is weird, and it's really hard to understand how this is the inspired word of God, right? Because this isn't just a history textbook, this is the inspired word of God, which means the Holy Spirit prompted someone to write this stuff down for you and I to read, and it's like, well, this is really weird. Why would God do that? And so, like, remember, we have to keep in focus that, like, these chapters by themselves are odd. They are difficult. But in the scheme of the purpose of this book being about being a mirror to Israel, and for all of us, like, this is what happens when God's people do what is right in their own eyes. Kind of like what we shared this morning in service, like that when people take on the values of the world, this is what happens. And so that is the purpose of what we see in these. These chapters are meant to show the realities of the wickedness of human hearts. And also the promise that we have from this, because Israel failed and came to this place, we have a Davidic monarchy. We have the rise of King David. We have the true throne of Jerusalem and of the tribe of Israel, which is then inherited by Jesus Christ, who then died, right? Like, so this is one step, and I don't want to say necessary step because it's hard to understand how this is necessary, but just like, yeah, well, no, it's hard. I'm not trying to say it's necessary. I'm trying to say that this is a step in the grand scheme of God's salvation narrative, driven by human sinfulness and God's supreme sovereignty and goodness. So a quote I have, right, is these chapters picture Israel. So these last 3 chapters, right, this is a brief summary of them. These chapters picture Israel working together only to destroy one of its own tribes rather than in unity against foreign enemies. This Israel perceives Jerusalem as a foreign territory and Benjamin as an enemy. That is what occurs when an entire nation does what is right in their own eyes without proper leadership, and a strong conclusion to the book that started with tribes gathering to find out who should lead them. Right? Chapter 1 was a discussion of them seeking God with who to lead, and Judah is the one that's chosen. And now here we see a leaderless Israel doing what is right in their own eyes, committing, for lack of a better term, genocide against their own people. So there's a lot of chapters to cover, but we're going to get through it all, I hope. So let's start with chapter 19, verse 1. In those days, there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took, he took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Once again, we have the reiteration, there's no king in these days. We are introduced to a Levite who is sojourning in the hill country of Ephraim, away from his Levitical duties, away from his Levite city. By himself, he is a foreigner, a stranger in a strange land. But the reality is that the fact that this person is a Levite is largely irrelevant compared to the last 2 chapters, where the fact that the person was a Levite was incredibly important. It seems that even though we see them being a Levite, we hear Bethlehem being mentioned again, it is unlikely that this Levite is the same Levite from the last 2 chapters. So we don't want to try and take things from chapter 17 and 18 and that Levite and try and project them onto this nameless Levite. Because he's just a person at this point. So he takes for himself a concubine, which is like a secondary wife, and his wife is from Bethlehem. And so like a concubine in these times was largely understood to be they are like a secondary wife. Like they held the same legal protections as a wife did, but there were certain things that being the first wife was the head of the household. So she's like an underling wife, kind of like the first son has a more and different authority than the second, third, and fourth sons. They're still sons, but they're not quite the same as the first son. So she's a second wife, or a third or fourth or fifth wife. We don't really know how many other wives there are. So she has a lot of the same expectations of the first wife, but she's not the same as the first wife. She's not like a sex slave necessarily, right? She's not a prisoner of war, but she's also not the first wife. So verse 2, and his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for some 4 months. So your text may say she was unfaithful. It may also say that she was angry toward him. That term unfaithful does not necessarily indicate promiscuity. And at that time, if she had been adulterous toward her husband, she would have been executed. So as we read unfaithful, like unfaithful to the marriage vow, not necessarily like sexually unfaithful, but relationally unfaithful. She may have been angry or hated him. And scholars disagree on the root of the Hebrew word here, but there's a word in Hebrew that either could come from the root word that means hateful or the word that means adulterous. And one of the thoughts was that if she had been adulterous, she would have been executed. And if she had been adulterous, why would her father have tried to reconcile this relationship so quickly? That we'll see in coming chapters. But at the end of the day, for whatever reason, she splits. And for 4 months, she is with her father. And it's interesting that in those 4 months, the Levite does nothing. His wife leaves him, whether because of her own unfaithfulness or because she just can't stand to be around him, and he doesn't do anything. And that could indicate a lack of care for her, that he just doesn't care enough about this wife to go pursue her. Certainly, we will see later in this text that he doesn't seem to care about her that much. And maybe that's why she was angry with him or hated him. Perhaps it was because they needed to spend the time to confirm whether or not she was pregnant. So if she had been actually sexually adulterous, they had to wait 4 months to make sure that she wasn't pregnant. We don't know. It just kind of depends on, but for 4 months, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't go after her. So that speaks volumes. So verse 3, then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, the Levite, the father came with joy to meet the Levite. So the husband goes to try and coax his wife back, which also seems to indicate that she left him because she is angry or has hatred toward him, maybe because he is neglecting her, and now he's trying to go talk nicely to her and coax her back to him. The husband that doesn't come after you for 4 months, maybe he's been neglectful. We'll see later, he definitely does demonstrate neglect later in the text. And the father-in-law's happy. Maybe and one of the thoughts is he is very excited to see his son-in-law, despite the fact that potentially his son-in-law has been abusive to his daughter, emotionally, verbally, whatever it may be that has resulted in her neglect. And one of the thoughts is that he is so happy to see his son-in-law because he wants to try and fix this marriage, because if he does, then he does not have to pay back the bride price. He does not have to pay back the money or the gift that the son gave him to receive the daughter in marriage. So verses 4 through 9. So we're in Judges 19, verses 4 through 9. And the father-in-law, the girl's father, made the Levite stay, and the Levite stayed with the father-in-law 3 days. And they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and as the Levite prepared to go, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go. So the two of them sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man rose up to go, the father-in-law pressed him until he spent the night there again. On the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart, and the girl's father said, strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines. So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, behold, the day is now waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry, and tomorrow you shall arise early in the morning for your journey and go home. So the father-in-law continues to show hospitality to the Levite. The hospitality is something we're going to see mentioned here. There was an expectation of hospitality. That's one thing that our culture definitely doesn't get is hospitality. But in their culture, if there was a stranger, you were supposed to care for them, right? You were supposed to feed them and give them, the idea of the Good Samaritan shows hospitality, right? Hey, here's a random person in need. Oh, don't worry, I'll take care of all of it. Come and eat with me, stay with me. We're not great at that. But every time the Levite seems to want to leave, the dad's like, "Nah, just stay another day, man. I'm gonna barbecue today or something." It uses nice language here, but basically he's just like, "Nah, just stay, hang out longer. I got some good food. We'll eat, rest a bit." And it's uncertain if this is an excessive demonstration of hospitality, if he's trying to bend over backwards to demonstrate hospitality to his son, or if this is just normal expectation. We probably have much closer relationships with our in-laws today than they did back then. This guy took the concubine and went far away to another country, and it wasn't like they had a lot of ongoing relationships with their in-laws at that time. So he keeps trying to get him to go. So verse 10 through 12. But the man, the Levite, would not spend the night. The Levite rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. The Levite had with him a couple of saddled donkeys and his concubine with him. When they were near Jebus, Jerusalem, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and spend the night there." And the Levite, his master, said to the servant, "We will not turn aside into the city of the foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah." So late on the 5th day, he leaves late on the 5th day, and he makes a journey as he's trying to race the sun and make a roughly 6-mile journey from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. Bethlehem to Jerusalem is not that far. It's 6 miles. 6 miles takes you from the church. Yeah, probably the far side of Montrose, Copley 77 might be, maybe not quite 6 miles. It'll take you to the far side of Talmadge, maybe all the way to Kent in a straight line. 6 miles north will take you to 303, to Peninsula. So, that's roughly the journey distance. And so it's going to take them a couple hours walking on it, because it's not like they have roads and stuff. They're making this journey and they're trying to race the sun. And at this time, they go by Jebus, Jerusalem, which is still held by the Jebusites. That is held, we see that it is finally David who drives out the Jebusites from Jerusalem when he takes Mount Zion, right? That's why it becomes a city of David, because David finally conquers it later. And so they don't want to stay in a foreign city. Instead, they want to go to the city of Gibeah. Joshua commands the sun to stand still upon Gibeah. And this is a city in the journey of Benjamin, which is 5 miles beyond Jerusalem. So making about 11-mile journey. The fastest I've ever done 11 miles with gear is probably 2 hours, maybe an hour and 45 minutes. No, 2 hours, because we did 12 miles in 2.5 hours. That was kind of like a race, and you had to wear your backpack with 40 pounds of weight in it. So but they're going with a donkey and stuff. This is like a 5-hour trek. They're leaving in the early afternoon. They're trying to make it there before sundown. Gibeah also is Saul's home, and remember one of the messages we talked about is the people who were David's enemies are bad. David is good. So Saul and Ephraim, so Benjamin, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, Ephraim, all bad. David, Judah, good. And so once again, we see a negative description of anti-David people throughout the Bible. So they want to go to Gibeah. Let's go to verse 13 through 15. And the Levite said to his servant, his young man, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah." And so they passed on and went on their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night in Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into their house to spend the night. So there's 2 potential places to stay, either Gibeah or Ramah, and they end up going into Gibeah, and they end up in the city center. And one of the quotes I have is this: If the Israelites in the town of Gibeah had known their religious traditions and values well, they would have fallen over each other to offer hospitality to this man who was both a sojourner and a Levite. The father-in-law had been a bit too hospitable for the Levites' liking, and now the Benjaminites in Gibeah proved totally inhospitable. Like, Levites were like men of God, supposedly, and it would have been an honor to host one of them. On top of the fact that hosting a sojourner in your land, like there are numerous times in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy where God talks about care for the foreigner and the sojourner amongst your people and in your land. And it was very well inclined, like, for you were once sojourners in the land of Egypt, right? And so that would be something that should have been greeted with immense outpouring of hospitality. And instead, no one comes out to him, and he sits in the town square. So let's go to verse 16 and 17. And behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was a sojourner in Gibeah, the men of the place of the Benjaminites. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" So this old man, who is also a sojourner, he is already someone who is established himself. He is a foreigner. He is not of the tribe of Benjamin. He is from Ephraim, and he has established himself as a temporary permanent resident, or a lawful permanent resident. Someone who he's got his, maybe, I don't know, the equivalent would be like his permanent work or visa to be able to stay there as an immigrant. Yeah, he's someone. He is an immigrant who's allowed to stay in the city of Benjamin forever. He, similar to how Abraham sojourned his entire life in the land of Canaan, or much of his post-God encounter life. And he just asked questions of the Levite, trying to, hey, who are you? Are you a sojourner? What can I help you with? And so verse 18, and the Levite said to the old man, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, where I come from. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw to feed our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your female servant and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything." So the Levite indicates he is returning to the house of the Lord, which is whatever his place of worship is in the place of Ephraim, and which seems to indicate maybe he's trying to diffuse the situation. Hey, I'm going back to church, man. I'm making himself seem less threatening. He omits some key details. He doesn't explain why he went to Bethlehem, or what he did there. He just said went to Bethlehem. He's returning. He does not identify himself as a Levite. And he seems to refer to his concubine as a female servant. He says, I have enough food for my female servant and my manservant. He does not describe my wife, my concubine. It describes her as his servant. And which seems to be more of a derogative term for her. I don't know, it would be it'd be like if I said, I don't need a maid, I have a wife, right? That kind of statement almost. Or if I started calling Hannah my maid. She's not my maid. She's not. That's not. But if a husband starts calling their wife their maid, or or a wife starts calling a husband her butler or something, or her, I don't know, it's a derogative term for your spouse, right? Or it's demeaning. Not derogative, might not be the term, but demeaning. So it's not inherently inappropriate, but if I introduce my wife to people as, this is my maid, Hannah, this is our nanny, Hannah, it would not go over well. That would be a very poor. I would. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I would be resting in my office for the night. And the Levite's listen, I have everything we need. You don't even have to feed us. I got all the food. I just need somewhere to sit. Somewhere to lie down. So verse 20 and 21. And the old man said, "Peace be with you, shalom. I will care for you all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into the house and gave the donkeys feed, and when he washed their feet and ate and drank. crisis has been averted. Hospitality was offered. The social customs have been met. He washes his feet like the servant act that we see Jesus end up doing later. This was the expected action of the host at the time. Like he's doing what he's supposed to as a sojourner when the people of Gibeah would not. And so verse 22, things get ugly. And as I said, we're going to deal some very fast and it's going to be very ugly. What I believe is the ugliest part in all of Scripture is from now until the end of this book. So verse 22, and they, the Levite and the Ephraimite, were making merry in their hearts. Behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house that we may know him. So the men of the city are sons of wickedness, worthless fellows. That language is only used a couple times. One of the other times it's used is to describe the sons of Eli, Zophni and Phinehas from 1 Samuel, the guys that took the Ark of the Covenant out and lost it to the Philistines. They want to rape the Levite, right? That we may know him is so that we can gang rape him. And this is, we know rape is inherently bad, but let's kind of break down where we see this wrong. So what we see is a violation of hospitality, because it is breaking the hospitality you're supposed to show to sojourners, because it's not just raping someone who is a part of their family, it is raping a sojourner. We see a violation of the marriage covenant, right? It is engaging in a sexual act outside of the bonds of marriage. And then we also see it as being engagement in homosexual relations, which is another violation of a different part of the Levitical law. So we have all of these tiers of law, and it seems to indicate that there's a lack of care for Israelite law in Gibeah. And instead we see a Canaanization of the people. And so the question is, well, why? Why do they want to rape this random guy? And honestly, we don't know. I went down a rabbit hole of trying to understand the psychology behind what drives people to rape. And one of the theories is that sometimes it's a power issue. It's about asserting dominance and power over someone. Other times it's about sexual gratification. And so I don't know why. I don't know if I can't tell you why they want to rape these people. This is not the first time we have seen something similar to this. We see something like this, similar to this, but not exactly like this in Sodom and Gomorrah when the angels come. And I don't know if it's because they thought those were angels, and that's why they, in that instance, but for whatever reason, they want to rape the man. So.
I have a footnote that, you had mentioned sons of Belial.
Yeah, sons of wickedness, sons of...
and this is just kind of almost like what they do. If we look at Wicca or witchcraft today, this is what the followers of that wickedness, that was just part of their drunkenness, sodomy. Yeah, and it might just be that I don't want to spend a ton of time on trying to psychoanalyze why they're going to rape people, but there are cultures in this world today where places of just absolute wickedness where it's we have the power to do so we're going to do whatever we want because it seemed like the fun thing to do at the time, right? It seemed right in our eyes at that moment, and it's hard for us to imagine that there's places like that, but there are, and there's places like that in the church too. And if you don't believe me, you can just read up what happened in the Southern Baptist Convention a few months ago, or any other major denomination that's had a giant scandal about sexual abuse recently, there's numbers of them. But anyway, so verse 23, and the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, the crowd, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. So the Ephraimite is protesting. He's objecting. He's like, hey, I've shown him hospitality. Don't do this. Verse 24, behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine, the Levite's concubine. Let me bring them out now, violate them, and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing. And so the Ephraimite offers his daughter and the concubine of the Levite. Potentially, he thought the Levite's woman was a servant and not his wife, and maybe that was why he was more willing to just throw her away so quickly. It's hard to conceive of why this would be an acceptable action. Lot does similar things, or he makes a similar offer.
But the Ephraimite is doing what seems right in his eyes. Like, listen, it is worse for you to rape the man, so go ahead and rape the women because there isn't a solution where someone doesn't get raped. In his mind, someone's getting raped tonight. Don't let it be this guy. He seems to have a sense of duty of hospitality to his male guest, and that sense of duty to hospitality to his male guest supersedes any sense of obligation he has to his own daughter.
And that's part of the culture back then, because we discussed this, you discussed this last week or the week before, the culture of men and women and the separation of, and he valued a stranger man in their culture more than his own virgin daughter.
Yeah, and ultimately, he valued in his culture, in his time, he valued a strange male who was his guest more than his own daughter. And like, more than just the trauma that he would cause his daughter, but the fact that as a result of this, his daughter either probably couldn't be married or would not, like, it's like the total, like, for him, he's also like giving up the future that his daughter could have, that he'd be able to, like, I don't want to use the word sell her in marriage, but that's kind of what it was. Like, but to betroth her in marriage for a bride price, like, he would lose that going forward because his daughter will have been defiled. Yeah, it's terrible. It's gross, right? So before he did the right thing, and here he is like compromising and doing the wicked thing. And ultimately, it seems to show that, like, yes, he was hospitable, but his hospitality was out of duty and not out of godly love. And his duty now has become misguided and twisted. His sense of duty and what he owes people is changed. He sees a no-win situation, and so he chooses what seems to be right in his own eyes, which is, and he tells them, here, have them and do what seems right to you, which goes back to the refrain of do what is right in your own eyes. Verse 25, but the men would not listen to the host, the owner of the house. So the man, the Levite, seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night long until morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. So the men of the city say, no, this is not an acceptable alternative. We want to rape the Levite. The Levite does even worse and says, nope, and shoves his own wife out. It's not the host of the house who is pushing the concubine out. It is the Levite himself. He is seizing his concubine and pushes her out. And she's raped by the men of the city. And so the question is why? Why does the Levite do that? One perhaps thought is that he feels like he's suffered enough shame on her behalf. He's not going to, if it's me or her, it's going to be her, right? He's not going to let her health and safety stand in the way of him not getting raped. He's already here because of her. He's in this whole situation because she ran away. He's had to grovel before her dad because she couldn't deal with being a wife, right? I'm not saying, in no way am I trying to villainize her. If there's any good person in this or any person that is not a villain in this entire narrative, it is the concubine. I'm trying to express what maybe he's thinking and why he does this. All of this is her fault in his mind, so it might as well be her and not me. It's perhaps his mindset. All right, so verse 26. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. So at dawn, right, she collapses at the house where her husband is staying. She is no longer described as his concubine or his young bride in Hebrew in the remainder of this text, but merely as a woman, which it demonstrates that like, not only has there been like in the mind of the Levite, in the mind of the author, like there's been an assault on her dignity as a human being on top of like her physical like assault on her. Her husband's no longer her husband, it's her master, right? Like she has lost any sense of like marital relationship. It is now her master who can give her a way to be sexually assaulted all night. So a quote is that seen from a wider perspective, the story says male aggression against women is the ultimate sign of self-serving amorality and reveals the sickness of a nation that tolerates it. Interestingly enough, there's a ton of really interesting feminist theology that comes about this, that reads the Bible through the lens of like the role of women. And it's very interesting. There's a lot that talks about this section because it's the one in which like an innocent woman is treated so terribly and then used as a pawn for greater wickedness. Like the crime against her that she's the innocent victim of is used to perpetuate further and greater crime. But anyways, it's just worth. There's a lot if you want to read that. There's interesting stuff to read there. So verse 27, as her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. So he doesn't seem concerned about his wife at all. It seems from the text that he didn't expect her to come back. He was just going to leave her there. And when he comes out the door ready to go, he's like, oh, I guess she's there now. That he stumbles upon her, unexpecting her to be there, which perhaps further indicates his own heart in the midst of this. So verse 28, his response to his wife who has been raped all night and is lying collapsed on the threshold. Verse 28, and he said to her, get up, let's get going. But there was no answer, and he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home.
Stop. And you've done more checking rabbit trails than I do, and without going further, I have a footnote that says there was no answer because she was dead.
So Pastor Dale's question is is there no answer because she's dead?
And I don't know where they would come up with that except for the following verse.
Yeah, so the indication is she is dead, that like her unresponsiveness is an indication of her deadness. And as we'll see in a couple verses, she is indeed dead already, right? She's not like alive and just wounded. She is dead. Like
so we don't know if the men just raped her and dumped her back at his doorstep, or if she actually
her hands were on the threshold. She moved
yeah.
back.
Well, yeah, so we don't know how she died, whether it was in the assault she became so badly wounded that she bled out, but at this point she is dead. Like the consequence or the result of the assault that happened from the men in the city is that after she made it back, she died. She was alive when she made it back to the household where she was left without anyone caring or trying, like, oh my goodness, there's someone at the door, maybe let's check on them. But now she is dead. And if she isn't fully dead yet, she is certainly dead by the time they make it back to Ephraim, right? Because there's still a journey. She gets tossed on top of the donkey, right? He's just like, instead of being like, oh my goodness, are you okay? Let me tend your wounds. He's like, get up, we got to go. And when she doesn't respond, he throws her on the donkey. And then they have to make a multi-day journey back to Ephraim. And so maybe there is still lingering heartbeats in her at this point. By the time she makes it back to her home, she is certainly dead. Which takes us to verse 29. 29 and 30. And when he entered his house, so he makes it back, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. So his wife is dead by the time they arrive back in Ephraim. And he considers this a grievous affront, largely probably considered a property crime. Like, that sounds terrible, but his wife was in many ways his property, and that's how it was viewed. And so what he does is he cuts up her body. He denies her a good burial, cuts up her body, and sends the body, which probably bears the marks of the assault, cuts and bruises and whatever it is, and sends it throughout the tribes of Israel and says he certainly, it doesn't say it quite here, but he sends some sort of message along with it. Like, it's not like a messenger just walks up and drops a leg off at someone's tent and walks away. Like, there's some sort of explanation that comes with this, and the different leaders of the tribes are astounded by it, and they're like, we've never seen something as wicked as this since we left Egypt. We need to take counsel, and we need to figure out what we're going to do.
So which do they consider wicked? The fact that she has been probably abused, or that the guy cut her up?
So that what they consider wicked is the abuse that has happened to her, not the fact that he has cut her into pieces.
He sent her out in pieces to let the nation know of the crimes that the nation committed.
Yeah, so him sending her out, like the wickedness is...
He's the one that set her out there.
Yeah, well, yeah. So we'll get that in a second, because he will tell his side of the story, and it is a very, yes, it is a very self-serving perspective. But the wickedness that they are witnessing, or that they are offended by, is the sexual assault, the rape that occurred to the concubine. The fact that he cut her into pieces and sent her throughout there, to them is like, it's shocking. But it's not like as like an, oh my goodness, wow, this. But it's not like that's not a crime. And we'll see later that they hold it. Well, ultimately, as we'll get there, like they hold a council, and then he gets to speak in it, and he's never really held accountable for any of it. But we'll get there. We'll get to that when he gives his testimony.
We're going to touch on this, but I'm not going to go into details. But if you go to 1 Samuel 11:7, the same thing happened, but with oxen. And it brought they came out, they sent them to the tribes, and they came out as one because they saw what had been done and they were going to be punished.
Yeah, so Pastor Dale pointed out, and later in 1 Samuel, we see a similar thing done to oxen, where the oxen are cut up and sent throughout, and that is the call to arms, the summoning for the council, the tribal council. So that sparks everything. So this atrocity, this action, is the launching off point for the rest of the chapter, right? Kind of like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand sparked all of World War I. This is what sparks all of chapters 20 and 21. And so like for as bad as this chapter is, and like it's going to get worse, so we'll get there. So chapter 20. Verse 1, and all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, which, if you remember, Gilead is on the far side of the Jordan River, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. So Israel responds. They convene a tribal council at Mizpah. This is the only time in the entire book since chapter 1 when they gather together as all the tribes. Every other instant has been like different conglomerations of tribes and confederations of tribes, but this is all of them. Verse 2, and the chiefs of all the people and of the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. So it's uncertain if 400,000 is an accurate number. Like that is a huge number comparatively what we would expect for military-aged males at this time. Like especially if we remember in chapter 17 last week that Dan only had 600 fighting men. But potentially that is how many actual soldiers are there. It could be that there was 1 million soldiers there or something, like that it's not necessarily meant as a literal count. It's meant to describe a numberlessness, a vast army, but maybe it's real, but we're not going to get too bogged down there. Chapter 3, now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? So Benjamin knows that this tribal council has convened. They presumably, the tribe of Benjamin received a part of this body that was sent throughout the nations, because only one city is the crime here, the aggressors. So the tribe of Benjamin certainly received one of the 12 pieces. And they ask they ask what happened. And so verse 4 through 7, this is the Levites' testimony, and you'll see it is a very highly glossed version of what happened. And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. So he puts a spin on things. He omits that he gave the concubine to them. He just says they raped her. He doesn't mention that he didn't try and care for her or tend to her or look after her or defend her. But instead he just kind of assumed she was gone and stumbled upon her dead body. He seems to indicate that they meant to kill him, which had not been previously described, but certainly this woman died from her assault, so perhaps that he just assumed that was. But at the end of the day, it is they're the bad guys and I haven't done anything wrong. I am the innocent victim in all this, and that's not really the situation. So he's like spin zoning this hard, and he says, all right, counsel, what's your verdict? What should we do? Like, what is your advice in how to handle this abomination? So verses 8 through 11, and the people rose as one man, saying, none of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000 to bring provisions for the people, so that when they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for the outrage they have committed in Israel. So the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. So they draw lots, and 10% are meant to bring the supplies, while the rest are going to go wage war. So, quote, Israel has not only assembled as one man, but they are acting as one man. Total unity within the 11-tribe assembly meets the decision for war against a brother tribe. This calls for immediate action. No one is returning home for any reasons. It is truly remarkable that this nameless Levite from an obscure place in Ephraim was able to accomplish what none of the divinely called and empowered deliverers had been able to do. None of the judges had been able to unite Israel, and this Levite, through his wicked actions and coupled with the wicked actions of other people and his spin zone, has been able to unite all of Israel. Verses 12 through 13, and the tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows of Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel. But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. So Israel sends out messengers, because as I said, Gibeah is only one city in Benjamin. So they go out to all the other people of Benjamin. It's like, hey, similar to when the Philistines showed up and said, hey, Judah, give us Samson. And they're like, oh, cool, I guess we'll give you Samson. Benjamin has a chance to survive, and Benjamin says no. We're going to double down on our losing bet, right? Double or nothing. And they refuse. So verses 14 through 17. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities to Gibeah to go to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all these were 700 men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. So Benjamin gets about a 27,000 person fighting force up against 400,000 people of Israel. I don't know why they thought that was a good choice. Well, largely they're in a defensive posture in a fortified city. They're defending a set city with walls, and typically on defense you're stronger, especially when you have cities, so you can really have numerical advantages like tactically. The men of Gibeah are highlighted for their military strength and prowess, that they can sling a stone and hit a hair. They talk about being left-handed, which if we remember, Ehud, the first of the judges, was known for being a left-handed Benjaminite who had been highly victorious. So it's calling on perhaps their own assumption of like, hey, look at our legacy and what we can win. So verse 18, then the people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us and fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go first. So Israel inquires of God who should go first, and Judah is chosen, even though they don't really actually play any distinguishing role in the battle. This is the second time we see Judah being demonstrated as the leader. It is important to note that at this point it just says Israel did this. It does not indicate that any of the expected religious rites had been practiced or that the priests were involved in this process.
They inquired of God.
Well, it says they did inquire of God, but at this time it wasn't as simple as it is now, where we can just go talk to God on our own. There was a religious process they had to follow. And it does not indicate that they have done that at this point. And that's going to be important to note as we go into 19 through 21. 19, the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah, and the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the men of Israel took courage again, formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed on the first day. And the people of Israel went up and wept before God until the evening. And they inquired of the Lord, should we again draw near of the fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, go up against them. So first, they draw up for battle. They lose 22,000 soldiers. Then they go back to God and they ask, should they go to battle? Last time they just said, who should lead the battle? And now they're like, should we go to battle? Which is, once again, with the underlying assumption. So the first time was just, who should lead? With the assumption we're going to battle. Now it's, should we go to battle? Verse 24, so the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day, and Benjamin went out against them of Gibeah the second time and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All of these were men who drew the sword. So they go back to battle. 18,000 more people die. So we've had 40,000 soldiers of Israel die. And at this point, no mention of any Benjaminites dying. Verse 26, then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings, peace offerings before the Lord. And we'll do 27 and 28. And the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands. So it's hard for us to reconcile. Like God said, hey, sure, Judah should win. Go out to battle, right? God directed them to do those things, and then they lost. And it's uncertain as to why that would happen. Why would God send his people to a battle against clearly the wrong, like for as bad as the Levite was, for as much sin as he committed, the men of Gibeah are also very much the villains in this and need punished, just like the Benjaminites. So why would God send his people to go get slaughtered by them? The closest thing that we can understand is that like it was because prior to this they had not sought God the way God had told them to seek them, right? God had, you're supposed, like, you need to offer sacrifices. The priest needs to be there. Like, is the Ark of the Covenant there? So they go to Bethel, which is a different place, not Gibeah. They go to the place where the Ark of the Covenant is and actually ask of God. And then maybe that indicates that prior to this, only certain people went there instead of all of Israel seeking God. Maybe it means that they tried to seek God somewhere other than where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the presence of God rested. It's hard for us to understand that because we don't have that. We can seek God anywhere. But this seems to be the first time where there is an actual seeking of God by the army. And they've decided we're going to go to war without seeking God. They made that choice when they gathered at Mizpah. They go to Gibeah. They decide they're going to war when they're asking God who should go out. Then they're like, who should lead the battle? The next day, not like, hey, God, should we even be here, and is this the right solution? And so when they finally go through the process of humbling themselves before God, offering the sacrifices God has prescribed, they go to the place where the Ark of the Covenant is, where the high priest is. And once again, we saw this high priest Phinehas, or Eleazar, the son of Phinehas, the son of Aaron, which potentially indicates that this happens much earlier in the timeline. And now that they have engaged with God the way God had prescribed them to, right? Their outrage is that the people of Gibeah violated the law, like the covenantal law, and yet here they are trying to do things without also seeking God. That's the best explanation I can give you. Maybe there's a different reason. We can ask God when we see him. It's hard. It's hard to understand why God would allow would give people direction, why he wouldn't just say, hey, no. But, it's there's also people that, you ask a question, and they may know the answer you actually should be looking for, but they're going to answer the question you asked, even if the answer that you get is not the helpful answer, right? It's like, should I buy this or that? And maybe the answer should be, don't buy either. But they're like, well, you didn't buy that one, I guess, and that's not the right answer. So I don't know. So God makes a clear statement: go up. I'm going to bring them. I'm going to deliver them into your hand. So verse 29. So Israel set men in ambush against Gibeah. So they want to set up an ambush. Verses 30 through 36. I'm going fast because we have a lot we still need to cover. And the people of Israel went out against the people of Benjamin on the third day and set themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And the people of Benjamin, the men of Gibeah, went out against the Israelites and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people on the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. And in the open country, about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, they are routed before us as at the first. But the people of Israel said, "Let us flee and draw them away from the cities to the highways." And the men of Israel rose up out of their place and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out from their place to Merah-Geba. And when they came against Gibeah, 10,000 chosen men of Israel, and the battle was hard, but the Benjaminites did not know that disaster was close upon them. And the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All of these men were who drew the sword. So the people of Benjamin saw they were defeated. So what it seems to happen is they perform what's called a feint. They line up for battle, and then when the men of Gibeah start to attack, they pretend to retreat. Some of their guys get killed while they're running. The men of Gibeah are like, all right, we're routing them. Let's go charge them down and finish the battle. When they've been pulled away from their defensive position in the city, that's when they spring the ambush, and they kill 25,100 of the 26,000 or so soldiers that Benjamin had. So they utterly destroyed them. At this point, this battle has cost Israel almost 80,000 soldiers, almost 70,000 soldiers between the two sides. So verse 36 through 41, this is a quick flashback describing this situation, the same battle again. So the people of Benjamin saw they were defeated. So the men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin, right? They started to pretend to retreat because they trusted the men in the ambush who they had set against Gibeah. Then the men of the ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the main ambush was when they made a great cloud of smoke rise out of the city. The men of Israel should turn in battle. Now the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, "Surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle." But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and behold, the whole of the city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw disaster was close upon them. So this kind of gives another description of the battle. The men of Israel have two different ambushes occurring. First, they pretend to retreat, and when the men of Gibeah are drawn away from the city, they have a group of soldiers that go into the city of Gibeah and burn it to the ground. And this cloud of smoke is because they're torching the city. And so that is the signal as Gibeah is running away. They don't know what's happening. So as the men of Gibeah, the soldiers of Benjamin, are chasing the Israelites who are pretending to retreat, a commando group of Israelites are burning the city of Gibeah, and when that happens and you see the smoke, that is when the 10,000 Israelite soldiers spring their trap and surround the Gibeonites, who are now away from their city, have nowhere to retreat to, and now their city's on fire. So that's kind of how the battle takes place. So verses 42 to 48.
I picture, and you can relate to this, I picture a bunch of men standing in a room with models, and they're moving them around. Now, when they move here, we're going to do this.
Yeah, well, Pastor Dale's talking about and then you said like a big map with models on it and moving around. Yeah, like a war room. That I've definitely been in that. That definitely happens.
The Battle of Gettysburg was exactly that.
Well, but even just like a war plan, and then you move this piece this way, we do that in the Army. We literally have like little miniature figures that you place on a giant map, and you move them around in the battle, and you have someone be the enemy. It's you put on you give us hats and capes, and we're basically playing like role-playing fantasy or something. Instead of like wizards and clerics and stuff, we've got like soldiers and tanks. Anyways, that's not the point. 42 through 48. So therefore, they turned their backs, so the men of Gibeah turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, and those who came out of the cities were destroying them in the midst. Surrounding the Benjaminites, Israel pursued them and trod them down from Nohah as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all the men of valor. And they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down on the highways, and they were pursued hard to get them, and 2,000 were struck down. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword. all of the men of valor, but 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword. The city, men, and beasts, and all they had found, and all the towns they had found were set on fire. So this is describing how all the men of Benjamin died. They tried to flee. They were chased down and slaughtered. They ran for 3 days, were slaughtered each day, until finally there was only 600 men who went and hid in the wilderness. And they're hiding in caves. And you can say, well, how could 600 men avoid 400,000? Well, listen, Al-Qaeda survived us for 20 years. So the people of Israel, that might have been tasteless, but it's also true. And so when you have mountains, you can hide in caves, and 600 people can survive a very long time against a vastly superior fighting force. Yeah. So, and Israel, in this turn, torches all of Benjamin. They kill all the men, all the women, all the children, all the livestock, all the cities. They burn it to the ground. Benjamin, the entire tribe of Benjamin, is held in these 600 men hiding in the rock of Rimmon.
Who we'll see have no one to reproduce with.
Well, yeah. So it is only 600 men. So we have a problem. So a couple quotes before we get into 21. For once, Yahweh has not operated in mercy or justice. In mercy, justice is brutally exercised, but the criminals and their defenders are not the only ones who experience loss. All of Israel suffers for the sin of one city, for with the annihilation of Benjamin, they have lost a brother and 1/10 of their own male population. The narrative also intrudes on Israel's understanding of justice. Justice differs from personal revenge. Human desire for victory over an enemy does not necessarily mirror God's understanding of justice and righteousness for the helpless segment of society. The Levites sought to destroy a tribe for the crimes of a few town ruffians. This was not justice. This was not divine. This was human rage. This was human revenge conceived totally apart from divine law, divine word, divine oracle, or divine presence. So it is not until they have already waged war against Israel that they actively seek God for justice. They convene their council, they raise an army, they go attack the city multiple times, and then finally they come before God and say, God, what are we supposed to do? Like they said, who should lead the battle? Should we go more battle? But it is only after they've lost 40,000 soldiers that they are actually like, all right, God, we need to seek you and understand. Everyone is suffering from this, and it was a reflection of their theology in their heart. So, verse 21. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah when they first gathered for their tribal council, when they decided to go to war, that none of us shall give our daughters to marry in marriage to Benjamin. So at their first gathering, they make this oath that they are not going to give their daughters as wives to Benjamin because of how sinful Benjamin was. It's ironic, as we see throughout this, because they seem more than willing to give their wives to foreigners, which was strictly prohibited under the law. But they are not willing to give them to Benjamin because the tribe of Benjamin are wicked. You know? Yeah. Verse 2 through 4. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? And the next day the people rose early and built an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So, they're lamenting. This is similar to their final inquiry before they went to war. Before their final battle, they're having a similar response. Let's go to Bethel, where the presence of God is. Let's offer our sacrifices. Let's seek Him the way He has asked us to seek Him, right? And they're sad because we've lost a tribe. And it's hard. They're like, well, why do we care? Well, it would be like if we annihilated one of the 50 states of America. It would be a big cultural identity issue for us of like, well, are we the land of the free, home of the brave, when there's only 49 states now if we went to war and burnt it to the ground, right? If we decided we don't want South Dakota anymore and we burnt it to the ground, it's like, well, who are we? Are we the 50 states anymore? No, we've almost destroyed one of them. So many of God's promises are related to the 12 tribes. There were declarations that Jacob made over his 12 sons. This seems to be an undoing of God's covenantal promises to make them a great nation. They have lost one of their key identifying realities of being the tribes. Interestingly enough, they did it by killing all of them, right? But And they basically, they dare to ask God, like, why has this happened? When the answer is clearly, because you've done what is right in your own eyes. Because you have brought this upon you. You collectively have brought this. So verse 5, and the people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come to the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. So they look for a legal loophole. Right? They made an oath that God didn't ask them to make, but then they made, that none of them are going to give their daughters as wives. Well, is there a clan that didn't show up? Because that clan didn't make that oath. But also we said that they were going to die if they didn't show up at Mizpah. So anyone that didn't respond to this wickedness is deserving of death. But then they're also not bound by this rule to not give our wives as daughters. It's weird and abhorrent. So a quote, like, these stories are not told to amuse an audience or to laud a hero. If any narrative in the Hebrew Bible is intended to raise a level of social consciousness and decry the present military, ethical, and moral situation in Israel, then these are the stories. Stories in many ways with more power to transform than the great prophetic sermons. Like, if there's ever hey guys, you need to have a reality check about the world around you and how you have adopted the culture around you and how you have allowed sinfulness to try and transport or to supersede God's goodness and graciousness, right? Learning about the wickedness of Israel should be that. So verse 6, and the people of Israel had compassion with Benjamin, their brother, and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel this day. So there seemed to be transitioning from mourning to action. They're trying to find solutions. There's 600 men left in Benjamin. That is all of Benjamin. 600 military-aged men, which means they can father children. So verses 7 through 9. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn to the Lord not to be given any of them our daughters for wives? And they said, what one is there of the tribes that did not come to the Lord at Mizpah? And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So they found their solution. The tribe of Jabesh Gilead, they didn't come. There is an oath by all the tribes that they're going to kill whoever didn't come. And so they're also not bound by the requirement to not give their daughters away. So once again, we don't see God prompting them to this oath. We don't see God giving them this solution. We see them doing what is right in their own eyes. And Jabesh Gilead being an interesting choice because it was that was a city that was very strongly associated with Saul. It's a place where he took refuge, as we'll see. So verse 12, I think it's 10. So the congregation sent 10 through 12. The congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there to Jabesh Gilead and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, also the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by laying with him, and they brought him to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So kind of like Samson, we've made an oath. How do we get out of it? By killing people. And so that's what they're going to go do. They go take 12,000 soldiers, and they go and they kill everyone who is not a marriageable virgin. Kids, everyone. I don't know how they evaluate who is and who is not a virgin. There's no prescription there. But somehow they have to make a differentiation. This is a marriageable virgin daughter that we can take with us, and this one's not, and we're going to kill them all. So they get 400 of them. They engage in fratricide, right? Israel finds a legal loophole on their own, and then they go kill their brothers, which is what got them in this whole situation, killing our brothers. And they return to their camp at Shiloh, which is now at Shiloh. They were at Bethel, and now they've moved to Shiloh. Verses 13 through 15. Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive, from the people of Jabesh Gilead, but they were not enough for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So we see that there is, they send a peace emissary. They come out of hiding. They offer 400 women to 600 men, but they recognize that they are still 200 short. And the narrator seems to put the culpability for this on God, that God has made this breach, but God does not own that. God does not put that on himself. He does not, like, that seems to be a narratorial prescription and not necessarily something that by God's words we see, because God did not bring this about. He didn't make this rift. So a quote here, the sons of Israel had gone to war on their own, gotten thoroughly defeated until finally they let a priest seek an oracle and gained the permission to fight Benjamin. Israel did not treat Benjamin as a member tribe to be punished and brought back into the fold. Rather, Israel treated Benjamin as a foreign occupant of the land and put them to the sword. Having destroyed Benjamin, the men of Israel apparently went far beyond Yahweh's commands. Now, seeing the extent of their actions and looking at the long-range results, they find themselves in a situation they do not like, so they turn all the blame on God. So they do what is right in their own eyes, and then it's, God, why did you let this happen? I've been there. I bet you we've probably all been there at one point. You might still be there right now. Be convicted. I just, like, verses 16 through 18. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And those who are, and they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our own daughters. For the people of Israel had sworn, cursed is he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they got to find a new solution. Where do they come up with the other one? And they won't have, and they have to have wives, otherwise Benjamin will be blotted out. And the idea of losing tribal and cultural identity for Benjamin is impossible. For us, we might just say, let him die. But for them, that is an unthinkable solution. It changes their the total identity of who they are as the tribes of Israel and like who God made them to be. So 19 through 21, their solution's not great. So they said, behold, there is a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, the south and south of Lebanon. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards, and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. So their solution is kidnapping. There's a feast in Shiloh, and they say when the young women, the marriageable women, come out to dance, go and take them away by force. And like this is similar. Like in Roman history, we have like the rape of the Sabine women. I don't know. Like maybe you've seen the musical Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. This is like that, but like in much more real and ugly and grotesque reality. Right? This is a war crime. Abducting women and making them your like sex slave or your wife, but like non-consensually, and this is being prescribed as a solution by the elders of Israel, and Shiloh must have had people present. There were tribal representatives; they had to have been present, but they must not have been privy to this conversation. So like we kind of see a parallel, right? Like the rape of the concubine that triggered all this ultimately is going to result in the rape of the daughters of Shiloh. The destruction of Jabesh Gilead that has already happened parallels the destruction of Benjamin. And once again, we see the solution does not involve God. So verse 22, and when their fathers and the brothers came to complain to us, and when their fathers or their brothers come and complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did we give them to them, else you would now be guilty. So they anticipate that the men of Shiloh are going to be upset, and the council is going to respond with, it's okay because we didn't have a better solution, and this is the only way we can do it without breaking the covenant. Or breaking our oaths, not the covenant. So a quote, it says, the interesting reasoning is that by letting their daughters go to men who had kidnapped them, the men of Shiloh would not come under the guilt of giving their daughters to Benjamin, and thus would not come under the terms of the curse of the tribal assembly made at Mizpah. Basically, you have to let them take them, because otherwise you're consenting to it, and then you're giving your daughters away. It's weird logic, but that's their logic. The reverse is that if the fathers do not accept the abductions, then the elders will hold them guilty and they will be forced into this by might.
It reminds me of the Pharisees dead, but we can't get him dead the way we're supposed to. So, yeah, but you say if you release this one man, you know, then this one can, it's, how often do we scheme our way through to justify sin?
Oh yeah, so and Pastor Doug brings a great point. It's kind of like all the bargaining the Pharisees do with Rome to try and kill Jesus, and like, well, he needs dead, but we can't do it. We can't judge him under our law because we can't execute people. And the end state is he needs to die, so let's figure out a way to make it happen. And you know, we do the same thing. We do that with our sin all the time. Like we logic and rationalize our way into sin and sinfulness. Like, this isn't really sin, you know. This is like light sin. This is diet sin, so I'm allowed to drink more, right? Like this is fat-free sin, so I can have twice as much, you know. Like we do that. Like we try and like as if like moral code is bound by like as if like sinfulness and morality is somehow bound by human legal logic. You know, and that's one of we try and like legislate what like sinful like laws about morality, but at the end of the day, like morality transcends any sort of legal or penal code we can create, right? We can't pass enough laws to make the kingdom of God happen, right? But that's what they're trying to do, kind of. Anyways, verse 23. And now the people of Benjamin did so and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. And then they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his own tribe, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their eyes.
That pretty much sums it all up.
Yeah, so Benjamin did what they were told. And then they went and built cities, and this is kind of similar to the end of Joshua. At the end of Judges, we have very much the same as the end of Joshua. Everyone went to their own cities. They built their inheritance. And
They did what they wanted.
yeah, and they did what was right in their own eyes. Like in Israel's mind, they're like, great, we've found a solution. We have obliterated an entire tribe, and we found an easy solution that only involved us killing one clan and abducting women from another clan. Problem solved, right? I consider this an absolute win. So like in their mind, they've found a solution. And it's like, yeah, everything's great now. And why wouldn't anyone be happy? Because the alternative is you die. So everyone would rather have this solution than dying. So this is a great solution, you know? And the women have no say in this. They get dragged off from a festival in the vineyards, abducted by the bad guys that they just went to war with. Maybe their brother or sister just died, or they're not their sister. Maybe their brother or father or just died in the war against Gibeah, and now they're being abducted by a Benjaminite because that's the best solution. So, some quotes, right? The only difference between, so this ends very similar to Joshua, with everyone going back to their own place. But the only difference here is that Joshua sent the people back, having led them to renew their covenant with God. At the end of Joshua, they renew their covenant with God, and then they return to their own lands. The people in Judges go back on their own, having narrowly averted destroying a tribe of their kinsfolk by putting one of their own cities to the ban. So, I know we've gone long today, but we had to get through it all so that we could wrap up before the break. But so conclusion, some concluding thoughts on Judges, and like I've said a lot about this. Like this, these chapters by themselves are incredibly, like in the context of the whole book, they're difficult, but by themselves, they're devastating. The whole point, so just some concluding thoughts. The book of Judges was self-consciously a continuation of the book of Joshua in its beginning and in its contrast to Joshua through its content. In its ending, Judges is self-consciously a middle point leading forward to kingship. The author of Judges has written a self-contained work, but he knows the rest of the story. To find the qualities of a perfect leader, one must look back to Joshua. To find the nature of kingship as it might work for Israel, one must look forward to Samuel. To find the nature of people without a king, one can readily explore the negative example of Judges. Examples which show Israel's drastic need, created not by a lack of divine leadership, but through a lack of devoted human leadership. The final verses do not bring resolution to the book's own narrative tension. If anything, they simply deepen the tragedy by escalating the tension, leaving Israel isolated under Philistine rule in various individual groups, serving false gods in false ways at false sanctuaries with false priests through false rituals. All the while, they ignore the commandments of Moses, the very standard by which God judges them. So I can't put it better than that. So it's a hard book. That's why we chose it, because it's hard. And I'm not one to shy away from hard books of the Bible, which is why after our break, there'll be no Bible study now until January 8th. We will meet again where we will do Revelation. We're going to go slow. We're going to go in depth. There's going to be handouts. There's going to be a big whiteboard. We're going to go with open mind and open heart. So I hope you all have a blessed holiday. I'll see you on Sunday mornings. We still have normal church. Don't forget the Christmas party on December 18th. But let's pray. God, we thank you that there is a king in the land, and it's the right king, the righteous king, like Jesus the king. And we don't have to do what is right in our own eyes because, actually, God, our hope is that you, and our prayer is that you transform our eyes into yours so that when we do what is right in our own eyes, it is through the eyes of Jesus that we are doing things, right? Make our eyes the eyes of God so that as we do what is right in our own eyes, it is the same as that's right, give us your eyes. So we commit our time to you, and we ask you be with